Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. What a difference a week makes. At this time, 1 week ago, there were still 7 candidates running for the Democratic presidential nomination. Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar were all still in the running. But a week later, they're gone, having suspended their campaigns as Joe Biden rides a wave of momentum from his victories in South Carolina and then most of the Super Tuesday states. So, where do things go from here? And will voters in Pennsylvania still get a say in the process with our primary still 7 weeks away? This morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, we're joined by a man who's been watching all of this closely. Andrew Lotz is an instructor with Pitt's Department of Political Science. His work focuses on several things, including the intersection of pop culture and politics. Dr. Lotz, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you very much.
For today, let's talk about where we are in the Democratic race, although someday I want to talk to you about pop culture and politics.
Anytime.
I think the Trump, a reality show figure becoming president, there's a fascinating conversation to be had. Anyhow, what do you make of Super Tuesday? What do you make of Joe Biden's comeback from, people were writing him off, and then Super Tuesday and South Carolina before it seems to have changed everything?
I think it's a great marketing thing for him, right? He, the inside candidate, gets to spin, they counted me out, and that's one of the biggest things, that you just have to get your voters in that moment to think that you're the underdog and that to kind of roll that ball forward. And so he's got the best of both worlds. He's both like the presumptive from ages ago, and he's riding this, I was the underdog, everyone wants to be on the bandwagon. And so it's a cool angle for him to work.
It seems he's almost in a better place having had that low period, because had he been presumptive all along, then you get into a Hillary Clinton situation where, well, I don't necessarily want this candidate. I don't want to be told that this is who I'm going to support. And he, maybe he needed the wilderness to be back where he is on top for the moment.
Yeah, it's certainly helpful to his narrative. Yeah. And, we can't underestimate the power of that in someone's marketing strategy for themselves, or their story of themselves, is that power of any hook that gets people to feel like they're making a difference, they're part of the team, that without you, I could not. I mean, it's huge for him.
Isn't it kind of remarkable when you step back and think, well, wait a minute, we're talking about the former vice president who can conceivably brand himself as the comeback, the underdog.
Yeah, the comeback kid, right? It's fantastic.
So what happened to the Sanders campaign and his anticipated surge of young voters? It wasn't there on Super Tuesday.
As someone who works with a lot of passionate students at the University of Pittsburgh, there's a lot of fire, but the numbers aren't always there. And I think Bernie's got a really passionate base, and so the Sanders campaign has a lot of power with that base, but the question is, can that expand beyond that base? And I'm not sure. Counting on youth turnout is a dangerous strategy, and they just don't turn out in the same numbers. And so, there could be things that could affect that, but I don't know. It's not an easy one.
To what extent do you think we're setting up for a parallel to 2016, when you had an establishment candidate, Hillary Clinton then, Joe Biden now, against an insurgent, Bernie then, Bernie now? Do you see strong parallels?
I see a bit of a change, because I think because the Clinton campaign was presumptive the whole way, right? We knew that was going to be the case. I think it's going to, you could point to the hallmarks and you could build a story for those, like the connection, but I think that would miss some of the, maybe down the road stuff that's going to happen in this fight. I think it's going to be a lot more lively at the back end than it was, or at least I hope it is.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Do you sense that in preferring to this point Biden over Sanders, not a big lead because Sanders has done so well
in
California.
Very close, yeah.
But if Joe Biden does go on to become the nominee, do you think the message from Democratic voters is, while we very much want to deny Donald Trump a second term, we don't necessarily want all these new things that Senator Sanders is talking about. We kind of want a return, because that's what Joe Biden would represent. It would be a return to where we were prior to Trump. And then Sanders can turn that around and say, well, Obama is what gave us Trump. I've heard that argument made.
Sure, yeah. I think it puts them in an intriguing place with their messaging, because especially Bernie is kind of stuck in his messaging, right? Like he can make some pivots and moves, but at the end of the day, he's the one who's really pushing like the like commitment to some static stuff, right? The sort of problematic, to my view, branded Medicare for all, right? The college tuition thing, though he's been quieter and quieter on that, right? As he's seeking to grab the center, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think he's more stuck in his messaging. And so if the Biden campaign can pivot around the Sanders campaign and constantly be in sort of those fresh spots and try and grab that more, I don't want to rock the boat center. The problem is that the progressive part of the party really wants change, right? This is a group that isn't just, they're not just, we want to get rid of the incumbent in the White House on the Republican side. They say we've got real structural flaws that we need to deal with. And I think especially for Pennsylvanians, there's some weak spots for Biden, right? He's got his support of NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, right? Those are big weaknesses that Bernie could exploit if he can get down the road to our primary, which I'm not sure he can.
Yeah,
the interesting thing, right? Sanders'
new message is I think he encapsulated it, I think it was on the Today Show, it was written up on CNBC. Biden told in an interview, Joe's going to have to explain to the people, the union workers in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc., why he supported disastrous trade agreements. He's going to have to explain why he voted for a Wall Street bailout, something Sanders vigorously opposed. Joe's going to have to explain his vote to authorize the Iraq War, a disastrous bankruptcy bill which benefited the credit card companies, and his one-time advocacy for freezing Social Security benefits.
Yeah.
So this is like the new Sanders anti-Biden approach. I want to just come out and ask you, do you see Biden winning the nomination, or do you think it can't be called yet?
I think it's too early to call. I think it's going to change quickly, though. I would, if you made me put down money today, I would put down money on Biden. I think the numbers are there, and I think the base as they go are going to play towards the numbers. And so I think just the sheer numbers are there. I think Bernie's got to have something really good hit to change it around. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case.
Well, okay, so I just read some of what Sanders has been saying now, or excuse me, what Biden has been saying. Now, Sanders, on the other hand, within days after Super Tuesday, came out with an ad featuring Barack Obama saying nice things about Bernie Sanders. Now that may strike some as discordant because Obama's the establishment, right? Obama-Biden is what Sanders and his wing say isn't good enough. It's too moderate.
Sure.
They want dramatic change. So what do you make of Sanders now trying to do what Bloomberg did, trying to cozying up to Obama?
This is what I love about the political machine, because these are all remnants of Obama's really genius sort of like, I call it propaganda, but it's his marketing strategy for himself, right? The Hope campaign was so perfect because it brought the center parts of the party. They could be comfortable. They wanted hope. They wanted improvement, and so those very comfortable middle of the road things, like we might throw the label neoliberal on, right? We might push that kind of like trade and partnership and build the economy, those kind of pieces. They're all there, but it also brought a lot to the individuals on the outside looking in and who could invest themselves in that Obama campaign and say like, oh wow, yeah, I want change, I want difference, I have hope. And so Obama beautifully split that difference, right? He could grab both of those groups. And I think, Bernie's critiques are of that centrist part of Obama, but Obama brought along all that sort of, like all those externals outside looking in that are sort of Bernie's core right now.
Yeah. Interesting. What about likability? It was an issue. It was an issue with Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2008.
Sure.
And I think Biden is trying to make an issue out of it now. I'm a nice guy, and Bernie can be polarizing. I think that's the Biden argument.
I have concerns about both of them on likability, honestly. I think Biden. I think he can get drawn into a fight, which I think is kind of a limit, especially if he were to go up against Trump, because I think Trump is going to do a really good job of luring him into a fight. And I think Biden would answer, and then things would reflect kind of poorly on Biden for having taken the bait, right? The classic, if you wrestle a pig in the mud, you both get dirty, and the pig loves it, right?
Okay. Sanders wouldn't take the bait?
I think Sanders dodges the bait better, right? I think he's already aggressive. People are like, why is this angry old man shouting at me? It's kind of the rap on Sanders sometimes. And my sense is that he pushes in a different direction. I think he'll take the bait, but maybe not in the way that Biden would, that Biden might take it more personally, or might take it, like more as fighting words. Whereas Bernie, his view of the world as an admitted democratic socialist is that it's already fighting words time. And so that's where the root of his anger and the root of his drive sometimes is like, the institutions need to change already. And so he's already there in a way.
The president makes much of Bernie Sanders being a democratic socialist. He referred to it as communism.
Sure.
Can Sanders win the nomination without really explaining what that means and why he has chosen to lead with that label?
No. Just no. I think he has to. And I think if he makes it to the national fight, if that's what the Democrats would have to talk about. They'd have to talk about, like, when this word gets leveraged, it gets, it's the other S word in a way, right? It's, oh, don't do this. And that's banking on people's unfamiliarity with the term, not misunderstanding the difference between socialism and communism, right? To say someone's a socialist, okay, they might support social policies. To say they're a communist means buying into a specific party-driven political regime that's totally amiss. And so, I think a lot of explaining has to be done. And the difficulty is, like, who's going to do that, right? The college students, they're not conversant on this. And so I have this fight all the time with my students, and they're like, throw the word socialist around. I'm like, well, slow down. We have to kind of talk about that. And then to watch that term go on all sorts of places.
Yeah.
That's hard.
All right, I agree. That would be, it'll be something to watch.
It will
See if he
be.
takes it on. All right, we are right on time. Back with a final thought in just a moment.